Welcome back, bow hunters. This is Ron with Stay Sharp. In today's sharpness evaluation and sharpening video, we're looking at the Grim Reaper Hades Pro 4-blade broadhead. I picked up a pack online and I've got one taken apart. This is the blade retention feature. It's pretty cool. The tip is amazingly sharp, and I've kept one blade in just so I could do the force reading on the scale. And as always, we'll go under the microscope, look at the factory edge, look at the sharpness in the certified sharpness meter, and then we will talk about the sharpening process for these blades. So let's start with the under the microscope view. I could tell while handling these blades that they were extremely sharp, and the images under the microscope prove that out. No factory burr left over, a nicely polished edge. I don't know what that repeatable pattern was with the notch every little bit in the blade, and you probably noticed it as well. I'll put a picture in here showing again. And that repeatable pattern was on all the blades. So however they're grinding it, maybe they're not looking at it with this sort of detail than I am, but it's certainly there. It's a very repeatable pattern. Nonetheless, these blades are sharp, but let's see just how sharp. .233. Now that falls within my acceptable range of hunt ready sharpness, and these blades come very sharp. The act of taking the tip off to remove the blades, I was a little fearful because of how sharp they are. You have to unscrew this tip to free up that little keying feature to get the blade out. And I'm old enough to remember broadhead manufacturers including a broadhead wrench and being fearful of certain heads that I worked with, and that seems to have gone away. A lot of companies aren't producing very sharp heads. Grim Reaper is. These are very sharp blades out of the box. But I say it in every video, out of the box sharpness is a snapshot in time. Once you practice with the head and you shoot an animal with it, you'll want to sharpen it, so you better get good at doing it. Out of the box sharpness is a one-time feature, and for the life of these blades, you'll need to know how to sharpen them, and that's what we're going to talk about next. I've come to the conclusion that the best way to sharpen this is using our gray guide. The gray guide is used for a lot of different blades and heads, and it looks like Grim Reaper products will be another one that we can add to the mix. The first step is to color up the edge with a dark colored marker to make sure you've got the blades properly in the jaws. And while you want the blade edge to be parallel to the roller, by eye you can get it so close, but the marker will tell you. Now, it's a new blade, so I don't have to go through 240 and 400, but I will start with 800 for this one just to check my marker wear. The weight of your hand is enough. Do not push down. That's how you wreck diamond plates. That's how you wreck sandpaper. Your hand is only meant to steer forward and backward. There's no need to apply a great deal of downward pressure. You don't get done any sooner. You bend the blade, you wear out the diamond plates. Light pressure, as if you're almost floating over the blade or the diamonds. All right, as you can see, we've got good wear. Let's flip it over and check the other side. Uniform wear on both sides. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to sharpen on one side until I get a burr, and then I will come back and talk about burr checking and the importance of that. So stay tuned. Alrighty, so I've gone for a while. It's time to check for the burr. The burr is a raised flag of excess metal that happens opposite the side you're sharpening on. One great way to check it is to use a piece of thin paper like Post-it note, 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch wide, and then you slide it on the ramp of the opposite side, and if that paper catches, it will bend and it will pop, which means that it's catching on a fine burr. That tells me that I've sharpened this side enough to the point where I've raised metal that's folded over to the opposite side. That's my signal to flip it over, sharpen the other side till I get a burr, and then we will come back and talk about the next grit. After getting 2 burrs with 800 grit, the next move is to clean off any 800 grit debris, whether you're using sandpaper or diamonds. Clean off the guide before moving to the next grit, which in this case is 1200. We don't want to contaminate the 1200 plate with 800 grit granules. So I'm going to sharpen and get 2 burrs at 1200, and then we will come back and talk some more. I've been sharpening on 1200 grit. I got a burr on one side, flipped it over, and now I'm checking for our second burr. That popping and flexing of the paper is telling me I've achieved a burr along the entire edge. That's my signal to then again clean off the guide entirely and then switch to 2500. When we get done with 2500, I will be back. Alright, so I've sharpened one edge of the blade with 2500 grit. I flipped it, I'm sharpening the other side, so now I'm checking for my second burr. So the paper catches on that burr. When you get to 2500 grit, when you've achieved the burr on one side, flipped it over, achieved the burr on the second side, then go back and flip it again like I'm going to do now and break off that last burr. Give it a couple of strokes, then flip it again. Break off that little burr. Flip it. So we're chasing that tiny 2500 grit burr back and forth from one side to the other side, folding it over, bending it back until it finally breaks off. You can only bend it so many times before it breaks off, and what you're left with is the burr broken edge with the burr removal at a 2500 grit coarseness. Now 2500 is pretty fine. So doing this alternating flipping before going on to stropping is just cheap insurance to make sure all of the burr is gone before moving on to the next step, which is stropping. So at this point, I will clean the guide up and the blade, and then I will move on to stropping with buffing compound next. The last step is the buffing process or stropping. I say it all the time, I'll say it again, you don't need a leather strop. You can use the back side or the inside of rice, potato box, cereal box, any kind of a cardboard with an unprinted side, you're only going to be putting buffing compound on it. Buffing compound is just a wax with an abrasive suspended in it. The cardboard is just a vehicle for that, so you don't need leather. You could use wood, denim, any number of things to apply the buffing compound to. The process is only go backwards, lift, backwards, and you can do this all day long if you like. You can't overdo this step. This is polishing the edge, which leads us to a burr free, because now we're going to flip it. There's no burr we can check for. There's no paper. That's fine enough. So we're just going to use a even stroke count on buffing compound. We are creating a burr, but it is small. So let's create it, then break it off. Now you'll notice that the white buffing compound is turning quite black. That is the metal coming off. You're not removing a lot of metal, but it is staining the buffing compound black. And you can keep doing this all you want. Do it on one side, flip it over, very light pressure. You are just creating the smoothest cutting edge that you can. Nothing jagged about this. Once the burr is gone, you are left creating a super polished edge that'll show up under the microscope, which is why I use a microscope. You can't cheat the surface finish under such magnification. It's either going to be sharp or it's going to be toothy and jagged as all heck. So let's keep buffing this, and then I will come back and we will look at it under the microscope, and then we will put it in the sharpness tester and see what our efforts have gotten us. That was a pretty good looking edge. No burrs left behind. A very smooth, polished edge. But the true test is what we get for a score. .108. That's a very sharp edge. Took very little work using the gray guide from Stay Sharp. Next we're going to talk about the trailing edges, sharpening them. Some people value them, some don't. So these blades are sharpened on the trailing edge as well. So we will talk about that next. If you desire to sharpen the trailing edge, you would loosen your screw and reposition the blade. Be careful, it's sharp. The same method would apply. You want the blade edge parallel to the roller. Tighten the screw, and don't over tighten it. You're not putting lug nuts on a tractor here. You don't need much tightness. But that is the method or the blade process for the trailing edges. Now I noticed that all the blades have this little notch in them, and that's part of blade retention. So you would want to be careful with how much trailing edge you sharpen. Personally, I don't value trailing edge sharpness at all, but if you do, that would be the process for doing it. Let's talk about the amount of weight that was taken off, because that's a common question. Hey, I've sharpened my blade, now how much weight did I take off? These are untouched blades, so let's weigh them. 10. 10. Here is the one I just sharpened. 10. So we're not taking much weight off at all. Even if you had hit a rock and put a nick in it, you're still always going to be removing less than a grain. So don't worry about the amount of weight that you're taking off. So there you have it. That is sharpening the Grim Reaper Hades Pro with the gray guide from Stay Sharp. Thanks for watching.